Welcome to Bear With Us, the podcast where two women bravely explore the Highline.
One charming town and quirky event at a time.
We're here for the people, the stories, and the small moments that make this place special.
And don't worry, zero bears.
Probably.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Bear With Us, the podcast where we take you on a journey through the people, places, and possibilities of North Central Montana.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here. I'm Julia.
And I'm Sarah. We're your hosts, and together we're here to share stories from along the Highline, stories that celebrate the small communities, rich cultures, and big ideas that make this region so special.
This podcast is brought to you by Bearpaw Development as a way to highlight the people and events that shape life across our 5 counties and 2 tribal nations. So whether you're local or a visitor, we want to give you a fresh look at the people and the projects that are moving this area forward.
From hometown entrepreneurs and community builders to those hidden gems and can't miss events, we want Bear With Us to be your front row seat to all the things that make this place more than just a dot on the map.
So we hope you'll bear with us as we explore the places and history and the heartbeat of this vast and beautiful region.
And what better way to kick off this journey than to sit down with the executive director of Bearpaw Development, Paul Tuss.
Paul, welcome to the show.
Good morning. It's great to be here with you guys.
So we need to start with the most important question right off the bat. Who is your favorite fictional bear?
My favorite fictional bear.
Opposed to a non-fictional bear, because
Yes.
we all have our favorite non-fictional bear, right?
Well, it's funny. I'm going to Glacier Park this weekend. I'm going to be doing some camping with some buddies of mine, and I'm sure that we're going to be running into some of those. I think that my favorite has got to be Yogi.
Yogi the bear. I like
grew up
it.
with Yogi. Didn't you guys grow up with Yogi
The
Bear?
picnic basket.
Only you can prevent forest
Oh,
fires.
I love Smokey. Who doesn't love Smokey? But I like the picnic aspect of Yogi. And wasn't his sidekick Boo Boo?
Bobo. Was it Boo Boo or Bobo?
Boo Boo.
Was it Boo
Yeah,
Hey,
Yeah.
Boo Boo.
Yogi and Boo Boo.
He does kind of glorify thievery, though.
That's
He's
fair. Are you a
constantly
thief?
stealing those.
I hope I'm not.
Oh.
I like it. Yogi the bear. Okay, well, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here. Thanks
Yeah.
for doing this, you guys. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to talk about this wonderful region that we live in, that we work in, and to let the world know about the Highline in Montana.
But first, we have to let people know about you. So I think we need to dive in to the early years of Paul Tuss. Tell us about your childhood. Tell us about growing up in Montana.
Oh my goodness.
What's
Yeah.
your hometown like?
Oh my. Yeah, I am a native Montanan. Our family's been here for multiple generations. I grew up in Southwest Montana. I grew up in a small community of opportunity, and I always tell people that I'm actually from Anaconda because nobody knows where opportunity is, right?
Well, they have the opportunity to find out now.
Yeah, and it's funny because opportunity is right down the road from wisdom. So we always talk about you have to get opportunity before you can get wisdom. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I grew up in a very traditional blue-collar family. In opportunity, I grew up in the house that my grandfather built in the 1920s, that my father also grew up in, and that my brothers and I actually owned up until a couple of years ago. It's been in the family for over 90 years. And graduated from Anaconda High School and went to college at the University of Montana in Missoula. Go Grizz.
Go Grizz.
Boo.
Yeah, I know. We got the cat Grizz thing going on here in the office. And I've been in economic development for the past 30 years. After college, I spent several years in Helena. I worked actually at the legislature as a staff member. I actually worked on campaigns for a while as well. And I moved to Cut Bank, where I was the executive director of a one-person economic development organization for Glacier County. And 25 years ago, I moved to Havre, and I've been here since.
So when you were young, did you always think that you'd be in economic development? Did you think, hey, I'm going to go into nonprofits?
Well, I mean, every 6-year-old knows what economic development is, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, mine does.
Common.
Yeah, I'm sure your child does. No, I can't imagine anybody in the world when they're a young child thinking, "What I want to do is become a nonprofit executive director." I was the typical kid that went through the various phases of what I wanted to do when I grew up, from being a fighter to being an airplane pilot to at one point I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I'm a little happy that that didn't materialize. Um, but economic development has been wonderful for me. It's been great for my family, and I'm so pleased that I've been able to be here at Bearpaw for 25 years.
While you were at the greatest university that the state of Montana boasts, what did you end up getting your degree in?
I'm a political science major. I have a political science degree, a bachelor's in political science, and a minor in history with an emphasis in public administration.
Okay.
Well, that fits pretty well with what you do. We've also heard you were in a fraternity.
You know,
Frat
I
boy
was.
Paul.
little
Uh,
little Animal House style.
yeah. What was that like? Are there any stories that you could share that are podcast friendly?
Yeah, there's a few stories I probably can't share, but it is funny you talk about Animal House because I was at the University of Montana and in my fraternity just as Animal House had come out, and so there was honestly kind of nationally a resurgence
Mhm.
in guys joining fraternities. I was in the Alpha Tau Omega fraternity, and I had spent 4 years there. I didn't live in the house the entire time, but I was very active in the fraternity. Interestingly enough, Mike Mansfield, who Montana's longest-serving U.S. senator, former majority leader in the United States Senate, he was a member of my fraternity at the University of Montana.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. When you were there, probably. You guys were
Yeah, when you guys
buddies.
were
He's
roommates.
he's a little bit older than I. He was there many, many decades prior to when I was there, but yes, I was in a fraternity.
That is so cool. With the fraternity, I know that you learn a lot of things.
Some of them not
Some of
podcast
them
friendly.
not podcast friendly. But did you learn anything from your fraternity that helped shape you into the leader that you are, or the the collaboration that you have to do today?
Yeah, it's interesting you should ask that because a big emphasis in our fraternity, and I think both fraternities and sororities have different things that they focus on. Ours really was focused on leadership. They had a leadership institute that many members in my fraternity participated in, and they really focused on whether or not you're going to the military or business or the public sector or whatever after you graduate. They really wanted the members of the fraternity to be prepared and to be leaders in whatever option they ended up doing in their profession.
Interesting. You weren't just leading pub crawls.
I did one or two of those along with a few other people. I don't do that anymore, by the way.
That's awesome.
I don't think we should lie on the podcast. So were you like a straight A student or um struggle a little bit?
I was a solid B student. It's funny. My GPA when I ended up at the University of Montana after my studies ended up being exactly the same GPA that I had in high school, which is very interesting to me. I was a solid B plus student, um, and and I enjoyed myself in college too. I was very involved in extracurricular activities. I was student body president at the University of Montana for a year. And that really was my in terms of getting involved in politics later on in life. So I had a very robust out of classroom experience at the University of Montana in addition to my studies.
What did you have to do to become student body president?
We had to run. We had a campaign.
Full election.
That is so cool.
I can remember one of the fun posters that I made when I ran for student body president. I ran with a woman that actually is one of our colleagues at the Department of Commerce in Helena, and her name was Mary. And so we made these posters that said Peter, Paul, or it said Peter, Paul, and Mary, and we crossed out Peter. Yeah. And so it was a fun take on Peter, Paul, and Mary.
I like your campaign strategy. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a really good time.
Well, for those that don't know, Paul does serve in the Montana legislature currently. So what a cool thing that got you started in campaigning. Your campaigns definitely seem a little different.
Yeah, I think you stepped up your style
pain
a little
game.
bit. Now you don't have to draw it with a crayon or something.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you, internet.
Thank goodness. So looking back now, is there something from your college experience that still influences how you work today?
I think an emphasis on contributing and giving back and community service. I really through both obviously my studies, but also the extracurricular activities I was involved with, and the professors that I was engaged with, and some of the other things that I did when I was in college, really ingrained in me the importance of giving back, the importance of making a difference, and also the importance of how one person can make a difference, right? Oftentimes in projects that I know that you two work on, there's this thing called the X factor, right? You have all the money, you have the right people around the table, but if there's one champion for a project, if there's one person who's going to absolutely go to the mat for the project, that project is going to be successful over other similar projects. And so, one of the takeaways from my experience at the University of Montana as a college student that I use to this day is if you're going to get involved in something, get involved in something, right?
Yeah. If
It's
the
it's
job
really
is worth doing, it's worth doing well.
that was actually a quote that my father used to tell me when I was a kid. A job worth doing is worth doing well. We used to have a plaque in our house that said
That's such an
a
old
job
soul.
worth
Look at
doing
me, an
is worth
old
doing well.
soul.
Yeah, and that has stuck with me throughout my life.
I love that. And I definitely see that, being your employee, I feel like you're a champion for a lot of projects, both in our town and within our region, and lately for Montana in general. So I love that. I really love that. If you could give yourself one piece of advice, like you to your college self, what would it be?
I would say, and this sounds ironic when we think about me being in a fraternity and being a young person at the University of Montana, but enjoy the journey. Sometimes we are so focused, and even at a young age, I was very focused on a goal, right? And so I always used to see the end in mind. And sometimes when you see the end in mind, you don't enjoy the meanderings of the journey, right? And so oftentimes, and it's very cliche to say, stop and smell the roses, but oftentimes the fun comes from the journey itself. And I just think that's an important lesson for all of us.
I
So
like that.
basically, you're telling your employees not to work too hard.
Well, that's
Oh,
what
I'll
you
take that
heard.
to heart.
Yeah,
That's what you
I'll get a
heard.
plaque
Deal.
for my office. Paul Tuss, don't work too hard. That's gonna be my email signature now.
That'll be the plaque on your desk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So when you graduated college, where did you go from there?
Graduated from college, and I immediately started working on a gubernatorial campaign. I really did catch the political bug back then, and the way that I wanted to make a difference at that point in my life was through electoral politics, not necessarily running for office myself, but helping people I believed in run for office and hopefully win office. And so I moved to Helena from Missoula, and I worked on a gubernatorial campaign as a deputy campaign manager and as a scheduler. So the gentleman that I was involved with his campaign, he was the attorney general of the state of Montana, and he was running for governor. And I had to schedule him as to where he went for months. And that was an intriguing opportunity for me at a very young age to get involved in a statewide campaign.
And let's also talk about the fact that this was before Outlook, um, and before Outlook had the calendar. So were you keeping
Is
your
that why you don't
schedule?
use Outlook? Is
It,
because
it was, yeah, I mean, this is the late 80s, right? I mean, we barely had the the computers, right? I mean, it was a different time than we currently have right now. I learned a lot, and ultimately, although he didn't win, it was the first step in what has really been a fairly long career, a very long involvement in politics, public policy, for the last 30 years.
after that campaign, where'd you go?
As I said earlier, I worked at the legislature, and so I kind of had this cyclical employment situation where when the legislature was in session, and I worked for legislature for 4 sessions as a staff member in various capacities. So I would work for several months for the legislature, and when the legislature adjourned, I would cycle back to a campaign or do politics. And it was a very, to be honest with you, it was a very unstable
I was just
life.
thinking that. Like, that
Yeah,
It
gives me
really was.
anxiety thinking about
it gives me
it.
You
anxiety
would
as well.
never want to do this at my age now. It really was a young person's game, and I wasn't necessarily married at that point, didn't have kids at that point, so it kind of worked, and I was very interested in doing that. But then I got married. Pam got married in 1989, and our 2 kids came along, and there really was a point when I said, okay, what am I going to do when I grow up? I really need to figure this out. And I had always been interested in economic development. I'd always been interested in community development, making a difference. And so I took the leap of faith, and I kind of closed the chapter on working on campaigns and politics. And I've been doing this for 30 years.
So obviously you've been at Bearpaw for quite a long time, but this was not your first stop in economic development. So tell us how you got your very first economic development job, what it was like, and then kind of how you transitioned into Haber.
And
It,
as we transition to economic development, though, can you give us like your version of what you think economic development is?
Yeah.
It's such a broad term.
I feel like not everybody knows
Yeah.
what economic development is, what we do here. So yeah, I like that question.
yeah, it's a great question. As the two of you know, talk to anybody in your family about what you do. I mean, at the kitchen table or at Thanksgiving dinner, right? As people ask you, well, tell me what you do.
My family has no idea. I'm sorry to cut you off. The only thing that they know is if they have a question about something that's going on, I will know the answer to it.
I just say I write grants.
Yeah.
Sometimes so much easier.
I was at a family reunion several years ago, and my sister lives in Colorado, and she kind of knows what I do, and so she was trying to explain to one of her kids what I did, and the first thing out of her mouth was, "Paul's the mayor of Havre."
Oh, so
No,
close.
not the mayor of Havre, not even close to the mayor of Havre. But that's a great question, and what we do here at Bearpaw Development is not just economic development. It's economic development, but it's also community development, and the two of you are very involved in that. And so it's a little bit of everything, right? It's a grab bag of helping the private sector to grow and create jobs, expand the tax base, and expand the economy. But it's also helping our local government and tribal government folks with the capacity to serve their communities, whether that's new water systems or rehabilitated sewer systems or walking trails or senior citizen centers or healthcare centers or what have you. So it's really doing what we can do to make the communities and the region that we work in a better place to live, a better place to raise a family, a great place to build a business, and a good place to invest as well. So it's really soup to nuts in terms of making these communities great places.
And I feel like some people would argue, well, the local government people should know how to do that. Business owners should know how to do that. Why are we needed?
Well, I can tell you, having worked in a regional economic development organization for the past 25 years, the Bearpaw model is exactly the model that is needed throughout rural America to help these smaller communities. As you well know, we have incorporated communities in our district with 700 or 800 people. They have one administrative person that's also responsible for 12 other things. So when their water system goes down and they have to fix it, and that fix is a multi-million-dollar fix, who's going to find out where to get the money? Who's going to do the grant writing? Who's going to do the administration for the project? They don't have the internal capacity to do that. So the two options that these smaller communities have is working with a nonprofit like our organization to accomplish that goal, or for a lot more money, work with private sector folks, maybe engineering firms or other private folks to do that. And so we fill that gap that these communities need.
I like that explanation. And I definitely agree with that we are that gap filler. I love what we do. So you're in it. Where did you start? Where did you start as an executive director?
Yeah, I started in Cutbank, actually. In fact, tomorrow on my way to Glacier National Park, I'm going to be going through my old hometown that I lived in for about 5 years. I had never been to Cutbank prior to the time that I had my interview for that job, and I can remember I can remember like it was yesterday. It was mid-September, and I had an interview with the entire board of directors for this organization. So there was 15 people around this table, and I went to Cutbank, and it started to snow mid-September, and it started to snow, and I thought, what did I get myself into? I didn't know really a single person there, and so that was my entree to economic development. I was a sole employee for an organization that worked not just in Cutbank, but in the whole Glacier County area, including Browning and the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. And it's so significantly different being the chief cook and bottle washer as the sole employee of that organization versus what we do at Bearpaw, where we have additional capacity. There's 7 or 8 employees, and so it was certainly different, but it was a great way to cut my teeth on economic and community development because I had to do everything.
Oh, I'd say. I mean, you didn't dip your toes in, you jumped in the deep end.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to show that Montana is one big small town, during the 90s, while you were working there, this gal right here spent her summers in Cutbank with my aunt and uncle and my cousin that was my age. So
Yeah.
we were running around Cutbank at the same time.
And Sarah's brain was like, I'm going to be in economic development.
Yes, yeah, as I was, 9 years old. Absolutely.
So from Cutbank, how long did you work there? And then how did you get here?
I worked in Cutbank for 5 years, from 1995 to 2000. And then in 2000, what was odd about that period of time is that my wife, Pam, was working for the Environmental Protection Agency in Helena. So we commuted every weekend. One of us was on the road. We commuted for 5 years between Helena and Cutbank.
That's a big no thank you.
And at that
With small
point,
children?
yeah, my son was 5 or 6 years old. And then in 2000, my daughter was born. And so we just came to a point where, like, we need to live in one house, we need to live in one community. And so Pam moved up to Cutbank. And ironically, as soon as she moved up to Cutbank, I got the job in Havre. So instead of commuting between Helena and Cutbank, we were commuting between Cutbank and Havre. That only lasted for a few months. And then we all moved to Havre.
That is so crazy. What did you think of Havre when you first got here?
Havre reminds me a lot of the community that I grew up in. Havre reminds me a lot of Anaconda. It's one of those medium-sized communities. You could argue that it's a little rough around the edges, right? Blue collar, a lot of blue collar workers here. What you see is what you get. People are as genuine as anybody in the world, and it very friendly, a very friendly community. And having not lived here at all until I moved here, obviously, was accepted with open arms. And so it reminded me a lot of growing up in Anaconda.
And our region here is much larger than just Havre, too. We have 5 counties. We've got Phillips, Choteau, Blaine, Hill, and Liberty. So we're clear across the Highline. You got to jump into. Was it all 5 counties when you started, or did that change after you came on?
The first thing I had to do as executive director is that the final county that became part of Bearpaw Development. I always forget if it was Phillips County or Choteau County was the last county in our organization. The first thing I had to do was to get approval from the governor at that point to add that particular county to our economic development district, as per the rules of the Federal Economic Development Administration.
Wow.
So it was 5 counties, but for anybody listening to this podcast outside of Montana, you have to realize that we take it for granted the size of our economic development district, but this district, our 5 counties, is larger than something like 7 states, right?
It is 17,000 square miles.
Yeah, 17,000 square
There's
miles.
approximately 2 people per square mile in our in our
Wow.
region and more cows than people.
As you guys know, I belong to a national organization, and I'm on the board of directors. Last week, we had our summer board meeting in, of all places, Rhode Island. I'd never been to Rhode Island. My understanding is that you could put 3 Rhode Islands in just this county,
Yeah.
in just Hill
Wow.
County. It's, you know, we're that big and they're that small.
And yet they probably have many more times the amount of people.
They
Right.
absolutely do. Yeah, we've only got 35,000 people in our
Yeah.
5-county region.
And
That's
that's
insane.
the way we like it. I like how
That
rural we are.
that was an adjustment though. Like as somebody who came here from out of state, just the sheer size of this state. And I mean, you have to basically get a hotel to drive from one end to the other. That was mind boggling to me.
If you think about how big Montana is, if you live in the southeast corner of Montana, you are literally closer to Minneapolis than you are Missoula. Think about that.
Wow.
If you put one corner of Montana on Washington, D.C., the other corner is going to be in Chicago.
It's
That's
huge.
wild.
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean that is incredible. I don't know. I think it is just crazy how far apart, but yet how close Montana is.
Yeah, like even though we're 35 or 17,000 square miles, like
Yeah.
it's the Highline region. It's, you know, like
It's
we don't seem that disconnected from Malta or from
yeah,
Chester.
I feel like it's just one really big community, especially when it comes to economic development, because we get to know all of the people in all of these small communities. So we have friends all across this wide
Mhm.
open space, and I think that's kind of it's kind of lucky for us to get
It's
to know
unique,
such.
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, definitely unique. And speaking of unique, I mean, rural communities up here have very unique challenges. What do you think gives this place the resilience to keep pushing forward?
I think it's because we know in our bones that this is a special place. I think that we know inherently that there's something unique and special uh, that makes us want to live here, that makes us want to raise our kids here, that want to make our neighborhoods better, that really encourages us to invest in these communities. And so the resilience of the people up here is phenomenal to me. And I hearken back to think about when these communities were settled, right? Think of when people came out here
I think about that all the time, and I think,
140
how
years
did you
ago.
get here? Why did you stop?
140 years ago, when you could be perhaps a whole bunch of different places, but you stopped here and you said, "By golly, I'm going to make it." And some folks didn't, right?
Yeah.
But for those that stuck around, and for those farmers and ranchers and egg folks and the folks that built this city, I can't imagine how hard that was.
I feel
Um,
like it's hard now.
I
Like,
think
you know, I live 40 miles out of Havre and it's a struggle sometimes.
I think it really is hard now. I mean, you think about all of the infrastructure that they have put in 100 years ago, and I think originally they thought, wow, once we get this infrastructure in, we're going to build a community. It's going to be great. It's going to be so much easier. And I feel like we're facing those challenges again because 100 years later, our infrastructure is falling apart. And we're having the exact same challenge. I mean, mind you, it probably is quite a bit easier with, trains and cars that can go 100 miles an hour. But I mean, I just think it is incredible that the people that live here like it here. I mean, I love it here. Man, it takes some grit.
Grit is the word that comes to mind. You have to have grit to kind of stay here, right? You have to have grit to love this place, and um, and stick to it. Right? I mean, these are people. I often tell my family when they ask me if I'm ever going to leave Havre, I said, "You're not going to be able to get me out of here with dynamite." This community has become part of who I am. It's become part of my DNA, and not just this community, but the Highline. I grew up in western Montana, so I was far more familiar with trees and mountains,
Yeah.
right, as a kid growing up. When I'm in western Montana now, Once I get back in this area, I feel like I can exhale. I feel like I can breathe a little bit better. It just the vistas and the open spaces. There's something special about this place, and I can remember a friend of mine from out of state when he visited here. He looked up at a very blue sky and he said, "I understand why you call it Big Sky Country, right? There's a reason why we call Montana Big Sky Country."
That
I
sky
like
goes
to
on
think of the
forever.
Highline as like Montana's little secret.
Yeah.
You know, you've got I joke around and call them the postcard parts. You know, the parts of Montana that Kevin Costner ruined for everybody. If you're listening, Kevin Costner, I'm sorry about that. But the Highline definitely is like a little gem. You know, it's not. It doesn't tend to be the place that people plan their dream vacation to come to Montana and go. But we have everything. We've got the mountains. We've got rivers. I mean, I've been fly fishing here. I've been kayaking. It's
bird hunting.
It's genuine
It's got
Montana.
everything.
yeah.
It's genuine
Yeah.
Montana, and in some ways, and it sounds cliche to say this, but in some ways, it's what Montana used to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is what Montana used to be, and it's what Montana should be, and it's the way we want to keep it. I kind of want to go back to the grit that people have to be here. It doesn't come without its challenges to live up here. How has Bearpaw been able to help our local communities stay economically viable, especially through the tough times? I mean, we've seen the pandemic, we've seen industry changes. What has Bearpaw been able to do in the last 10 or 15 years to help these communities through those tough times?
I think it has to do a lot with the partnerships that we've built. I think it has to do with the reputation that we have, and I think it has to do with the fact that we never say never. We don't give up. We don't throw out the white flag and say we're giving up
We get
because
frustrated.
no, of course we get frustrated, but we know at the outset of the projects that we work at that we're working on this project because somebody else couldn't get this done. If this project was easy to do, it would have been done a long time ago. If a project is darkening our doorstep here at Bearpaw Development, it means that we're going to have to dig in. We're going to have to do some research. We're going to have to spend some time. And as you two know, some of the projects that we work on, I would argue maybe most of the projects that we work on are multi-year projects. And people don't understand that when you're gonna solve a problem like rehabilitating a water system or a sewer system, getting funding and working through all of the nuances that we have to. These are multi-year projects, very complex, and so uh, I think to answer your question more directly, I think it takes the attitude that we're going to partner with whoever we need to partner with to get this done. We're going to find funding in places that perhaps other people have not looked for funding for before, and we're not going to give up.
What is, because this is always fun for me, and I think we all have one. You speak of like the challenges for certain projects and how, you know, we don't give up, but like it takes a hot minute to try to find something. What's one that's in your head right now that you really want to solve? You want to fix this problem, you want to find the funding, and it's still on our work plan, but we haven't found it yet.
The project that I am always thinking about these days is the St. Mary project.
Mhm.
You know, we have been very directly involved and sometimes peripherally involved in the St. Mary project that literally takes water from the St. Mary River Basin and transfers it into the Milk River Basin. And it provides the water for 18,000 people here on the Highline and 120,000 acres for irrigation. And as you both know, we had a catastrophic failure with the siphons that are located on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. And this is an incredibly complex project that goes into Canada, and it was built 120 years ago with horses and buggies, right?
And never updated.
And never updated.
That's just terrifying.
It's wild.
So, we're about to receive the first drop of water from this renovated project in about a month, give or take.
Yes. Oh, you told me about this just the other day. So I always thought when the siphon is rebuilt and it's fixed, they're going to get the water going and it's going to get to our, lake, our Fresno Dam, where we draw our water from, right off the Milk River there. That's not true. It's not, I thought, 5 hours it'll be here. Tell me how long it takes.
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
You open the spigot up at the St. Mary project up by Babb, Montana, and 3 weeks later, that water is coming out of our tap. 3 weeks. That's a long time.
Yeah.
They could fix it today and we won't see it for a month.
That's correct. But that's the type of project that the complexity of that, and we're not directly involved with that project in terms of the funding right now, but it's a wonderful example of the type of project that is complex, that you cannot give up on. And we've been working on this project since the day I walked in the door as executive director, and I've been here 25 years. So that's a great example of the type of economic and community development project that's super important for our region, and honestly important for the entire state of Montana, that wouldn't have gotten done had it not been people just saying, we're not going to give up on this.
And I think it's a great example of what you were talking about with partnerships, because
You can't do that alone.
No, not one single organization could have done this all by themselves. It has taken so many organizations, and we're not done yet. And not to mention, this is just the first project along the many, many different drops on the river. And if anything else fails, we're kind of going to go back to having some issues.
I think it's important to talk about partners. I really do, because like you said, Sarah, we don't do this in a vacuum, and we rely on partners at the state level, at the federal level, at the local government level, at the tribal government level, in the nonprofit sector, to get these things done. And oftentimes, when we look at the projects that we're involved with that are on our work plan, somebody else has tackled a similar project someplace else, right? And so we have wonderful colleagues, as you well know, in economic development spread throughout Montana and even nationally, that you can pick up the phone and say, how did you do this? This seems really complex. How did you solve this problem? And so I think getting through the rough patches sometimes on projects, we do that through the partnerships that we've built, literally in our case, over 50, 60 years.
And the best part about the partnerships in economic development is, for the most part, it's not competitive. We're not rooting against each other. All these different agents, like throughout the entire state, for the most part, we cooperate really well, and we don't want each other to reinvent the wheel or to do things again. So, if I were to call an economic development district somewhere else and be like, "You did this plan, can I see it?" They would be like, "Absolutely! Like, don't waste resources. Here you go." And that's especially in today's world, that's not really the kind of environment that you see. Yeah, it really does work together.
Yeah, I love that, Bearpaw Development gets to be a part of the overall Montana Economic Development Association. And I know you've been quite involved with them as well. Can you talk about MEDA a little bit, as we like to call it?
Yeah, MEDA is Montana Economic Developers Association, and I serve on their board, and both of you are members, and our entire organization is. And it's this wonderful collaboration of economic and community developers that some work for government. More often than not, they work for nonprofit organizations like ours that are either regional in scope or, in some cases, local with what they do. And to Sarah's point, there's not competition between us. There's cooperation with us. And we want to see Montana grow. We want to see Montana succeed. And we have got wonderful colleagues in some of the largest communities in the state. My counterpart, that is currently the executive director of the Economic Development Organization in Billings, our largest city, he and I just met a couple days ago when I happened to be in Helena for a legislative meeting. We talked about projects. We talked about how we can collaborate. We talked about how larger communities can help smaller communities, and how those smaller communities can also help the larger communities be successful. So we really do work together well, and we realize that we get a lot more done when we do that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So before we kind of move on to what else is going on in your life, I just kind of want to know, most of us have kind of stumbled upon economic development. We didn't set ourselves out. We weren't the 6-year-old going, oh, I love economic development. We didn't know what it was necessarily. I feel like a lot of our lives have just kind of led us here by accident. But for those that are looking, at how they can get involved for the younger generation that is looking at, I want to help my community. I want to be able to do these types of projects. How can they get into an economic development firm? How can they be a part of this?
Well, there's no, it's not linear, right? It's not like one day you say, I'm going to be an economic developer, and you just are on this fast track toward doing that. And there's not a lot of degrees that
No,
you can get in college, an
none of
economic
our
development degree,
none of
right?
our college degrees actually are
I know a
economic.
whole lot of economic developers in Montana and throughout the country, and I don't know that one of us has an economic development degree per se. So it doesn't matter too much about where your academic credentials necessarily lie. What matters more than anything, in my opinion, is wanting to make a difference in your community. It really is the passion that you need for wanting to make a difference. And also, more often than not, being comfortable with working in the nonprofit sector, right? For society to succeed, what they say is that you need a strong public sector, a strong private sector, and a strong nonprofit sector. And oftentimes people don't realize the importance that the nonprofit sector brings to the vitality of communities. And so I think that if people are listening to this podcast, or younger folks who are listening to this podcast, and they say, "Well, how do I do this?" Uh, there's not a formula for getting to economic development, but I think that that spark and that passion within you is the first step.
I love that. And I see that spark in a lot of people. And I want to help foster that. And I hope that, if anybody is listening to this podcast that wants to get involved, comes and talks to you and can see your passion, because you truly have this unmatched passion for not only the Havre community, but the broader Bearpaw region. It's just fantastic. Um, you're quite a leader here, but you're not only a leader locally, you're also a leader in the broader Montana region, as a legislator. So I kind of want to know, what lessons from this work do you think apply to the leadership in your time in the legislature?
Partnerships.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, I would have zero success as a legislator if I wasn't willing to reach across the aisle, if I wasn't willing to work with the executive branch, if I wasn't willing to compromise. In our political world these days, it seems like the word compromise is a dirty word. The word compromise is one that nobody wants to talk about. It wasn't that many years ago that everybody acknowledged the fact that I'm not going to get everything I want, but half a loaf is better than no loaf. And so, as you two know, I've served in the legislature now for 2 sessions, and my batting average is pretty good in terms of getting legislation passed and signed by the governor in an environment that my party is in the minority. So I know full well, walking into the legislature on day one, that I'm going to have to work with folks on the other side just to get the votes that I need to get my legislative ideas across the finish line. But what that also means is that those people that I need to rely on also need to rely on me. So I need to be a good partner, just like I expect them to be a good partner. And I think between working in economic development and working in the public sector in terms of the legislature, I think that applies to both.
What are you most excited for this discussion?
Oh boy, there's a whole bunch of things that we did. Number one is property tax relief. We are going to see significant property tax relief for small businesses and residential homeowners, not just obviously here on the Highline, but throughout Montana. And that was a struggle. Our property taxes did go up, and they didn't go up here as much as they did in other parts of Montana. But we have comprehensive property tax reform that's going to put more dollars in people's pockets over the next couple of years. There's also, as you well know, I'm a big proponent of funding infrastructure. And the partnership that the state of Montana has with our local communities, regional organizations, projects like the St. Mary Project, to help them fund things. one of the projects that I was very intimately involved with Commissioner Strissel was was assisting Hill County through a grant that they had submitted to the state of Montana for $350,000 for uh, access to the courthouse here in Havre, um, handicap accessibility through a new elevator, renovations to the current elevator. So that's a concrete example of something that we did in the legislature.
And that elevator's terrifying.
Yeah, their current elevator is really scary.
My daughter calls it the alligator.
The alligator.
Can I ride the
love that.
alligator?
So Sarah had asked you, like, if you could wave your magic wand, what would you fix in our economic development region? But I want to know, with the legislature, if you could wave your magic wand and fix something for the region that you serve as a legislative representative, what would you fix?
I want to take it a step further. I want to say what would I fix for the entire state of Montana with regard to the legislature? Um, and I think if we could do something about the raw partisanship that sometimes raises its ugly head, um, and I had a proposal, not this session, but the last session I was there, that would require the House and the Senate of the Montana legislature to be seated alphabetically. So think about that.
Yeah.
There is physically, we talk about reaching across the aisle. There is a literal aisle. And on one side of the aisle sits the Democrats, and on the other side of the aisle sits the Republicans. What if we didn't do that?
What if we could just be friends?
What if we could just be friends?
Happy
What if we literally were seated alphabetically? And by the way, this is not an original thought on my part. When Montana adopted its current constitution in 1972, we had a constitutional convention. There was 100 delegates from throughout Montana, and they were seated alphabetically. And this is always considered one of the best constitutions of any state in the nation. So I think it's really hard to get upset with your friend who is sitting next to you, even though they are of the opposite party, because you're going to be spending 90 days next to them. And it's pretty hard to get upset with somebody, right? And so I think lessening the partisanship in the Montana legislature and acting in a more bipartisan way solves a lot of problems.
Just keeping Montana as the main goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it goes further than the legislature and further than just, Democrat, Republican parties. I feel like there's an us versus them mentality all the way down. Um, whether it's rural communities against non-rural communities or counties against cities. And, there's just this us versus them all the time. And I really
Locals
like
versus Kevin Costner.
locals
Yeah.
versus Kevin Costner. Again, I'm sorry, Kevin Costner.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm sure he is. I really do feel like, what you've been saying of reaching across the aisle and making those connections. We are one Montana. We can be Montana against the rest of the United States, but we are one Montana. I think a lot of people forget that.
We're all Montanans, right? And at the end of the day, filling a pothole, there's not a partisan way to fill a pothole. There's not there's not a partisan way to fix a water or sewer system or a bridge. There's not a partisan way to feed a hungry kid. There's not a partisan way to provide public access to public lands, right? There's a Montana way to do that. And I just think that if we lessen the heat on the partisanship, both in the Montana legislature as well as at the federal level in Congress, we could get a lot more done.
100%.
And I think that's why we enjoy economic development, as well. Like we keep bringing it up at the cooperation.
Yeah, our projects are going to serve everyone.
Our problems are not political. They're there. They need some sort of problem solving.
If I don't have water, my neighbor probably doesn't either. Unless I didn't pay my water bill, but
Get your life together.
I know. Well, what's something hopeful or inspiring that you've seen recently in one of our communities in the Bearpaw region?
Oh my goodness.
It better be one of my projects.
Or one of
Otherwise,
mine.
I'm gonna leave.
I think all of our projects are special. And of course, when you're working on them on a daily basis, your heart and your soul is in these projects, right? Um, I think the infrastructure projects that we work on in our communities are particularly special because everybody has to come together to make these things happen, right? Local communities, local governments have to come together. We have to partner with the state. We have to oftentimes partner with the federal government, and we all have to kind of be on the same page, or the project's not going to happen, right? So I often think whether it's a bridge or building a new clinic or cleaning up asbestos from an old building, or petroleum contamination, or whatever it happens to be, there's a lot of moving parts. There's not one thing you have to do. There's 100 things that you have to do. And so sometimes when you look at a project that has been completed, you look back at the trajectory of that project, and it's almost amazing it got done because the stars had to be aligned for these things, right? These are not easy things to do. And so rather than identifying one project that is special, I think the basket of projects that we work on, and certainly you two work on in our region, are all special because it takes it takes a village. And I know that sounds cliche, but it takes everybody rowing in the same direction and trusting each other that we're going to work for the common good to get something done. That's special.
So what I'm hearing is that Julie and I are your favorite employees.
Yeah, that's what I'm
That's
No,
the takeaway
nobody.
I'm
No,
getting.
no takey backs.
Yeah,
No takey backsies.
Actually, we don't need any further comments on that.
Yep.
Let's move on.
Bye.
Nobody else is in this room right now, but they're going to be listening to this podcast.
Oh,
Kevin
fair
Costner
enough.
heard it. We're your favorite.
Heard by Kevin Costner first. Well, this has been so wonderful, Paul. I so appreciate you sitting down with us and having this conversation today.
Our maiden voyage.
Our
of
maiden
Bear with
voyage.
us. What is something you want people to take away from this new journey, this podcast? Like what do you want this to hopefully do for our area?
I think the importance of this podcast is letting everybody know that rural Montana is alive and kicking. I think if there's one lesson that I would love to get out of this podcast, particularly as people from outside of our region listen to it, it's that there's an important place in Montana and in America for rural areas. Oftentimes, I think, particularly for our urban counterparts, when they think of rural areas, they think of dying communities. They think of communities that may have been vibrant 60 or 70 years ago, but are on the downward slope right now. And if there's one lesson that can come out of this podcast, it's that we're here, we're alive, we're doing well, and we're doing everything we can to make this a wonderful place to live and raise a family.
Hear, hear.
That is a great way to end this podcast. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to all of our listeners today.
Even Kevin Costner.
Especially Kevin Costner. This has been Bear With Us, and we hope that you will join us next week or
2 weeks.
in
We're gonna
2
do it every
weeks.
2 weeks.
We hope that you'll join us next time for our next podcast edition, where we will continue to interview those along the Highline and in the Bearpaw region that make this place so special.
Thank
Thanks,
you
guys.
so much.
Thanks.